They say time heals all wounds. But in the Wasteland, time is the weapon that kills you slowly, piece by piece, for 200 years. I am not a hero of this story. I am a ghost trapped in rotting meat. A living case study in sustained cellular instability. At the end of the world, silence holds the floor. It's a cynical, loaded quiet, thick with unspoken verdicts. The grand fireworks are over. What remains is the administrative mop-up, the melancholy paperwork of decay. The true apocalypse wears a tie and carries a clipboard. It doesn't end in a bang, but in the slow, inevitable execution of 1,000 minor safety protocol failures. I am not a survivor. That implies something was salvaged. I am a document, a living audit. The scale is wrong. Your mind prepares for vast, empty deserts. It doesn't prepare for the intimacy of ruin. It starts with a small, persistent sensation on the tongue, a flat, metallic taste, as if you've licked a fossilized battery. That's the isotopes. They're polite invaders. Then the smell hits, a layered symphony of termination. The sharp, coppery scent of wet rust bleeding from steel bones. The acrid ghost of ozone from a shattered conduit. And beneath it, the damp, sweet odor of rotten wood and forgotten carpets. The wind is no relief. It's a carrier, dragging grit-fine, abrasive particles of concrete and glass against your skin. It brings whiffs of distant, chemical fires and the unmistakable, plastic tang of something that should never burn, burning forever. My day begins and ends with the same decaying routine. I am woken not by light, but by sound. The rhythmic, dry click-click-click of a Geiger counter. It's not panicked. It's procedural. It ticks in time with my own pulse, a chilling biomonitor. I lift a heavy arm, the motion stiff, and consult the cracked face of my Pip-Boy. The screen glows with a sickly institutional green. Ambient radiation, 3.8 rads, a cheerful, automated reminder. I perform the ritual of the mask, adjusting corroded filters with clumsy fingers. The seals are brittle. The action is purely ceremonial, a nod to a forgotten standard of care. I sit and use a piece of scrap metal to scrape the overnight accumulation of gray dust from my forearms. It falls in silent, toxic clouds. This is my primary maintenance duty. The room around me is a capsule of collapse. Wind doesn't whistle here. It groans, a low, resonant note, as it forces its way through the skeleton of the building next door. On a shelf, a salvaged radio crackles. A fragment of a pre-war advertisement spills out, a woman's voice impossibly bright, selling a brand of soap that no longer exists. The signal collapses into static halfway through the word fresh. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. 1, count my water bottles. 3. The plastic is cloudy. I take a single measured sip, the metallic taste on my tongue merging with the water's own flavor. This is the sum of my existence. Not a battle for survival, but the meticulous management of a dwindling inventory. I am conducting the slow, boring audit of my own endpoint, surrounded by the auditory landscape of decay, the clicking monitor, the moaning architecture, and the ghostly, distorted echoes of a world that believed in a future, delivered through the static of a dead signal. The summons came not with a bang, but with a polite, bureaucratic chime from the Pip-Boy. It was a soft, digital ping that felt obscene in the silence. The screen, which usually flickered with radiation counts, now displayed a crisp, official message in that same cheerful green. Notice: Vault 42, resident number 1087. Mandatory post-exposure biomass evaluation and resource reallocation. Assessment is scheduled. Please report to Vault Medical Bay, Sector 3, by 1400 hours. Compliance is optimized for community safety. Vault-Tec proudly presents this reminder. The words resource reallocation swam in my vision. I knew what that was. It was the cold corporate synonym for the compost heap. The journey to Sector 3 was a lesson in the architecture of dread. The vault's usual hum of recycled air and distant machinery was gone, replaced by a deeper silence, punctuated by the weak, irregular bleating of an alarm from a level below. A red light mounted high on the wall pulsed slowly, casting a bloody glow on the riveted metal every few seconds. The sound was tired, like the vault itself had given up on the warning. My own footsteps echoed too loudly in the empty corridor, a metallic tap-tap-tap that felt like an announcement. I passed a workstation where a terminal screen was frozen on a diagram of a human circulatory system, with parts highlighted and labeled potential yield. I kept walking. The medical bay doors didn't swoosh open. They shuddered, one panel jerking halfway before grinding to a halt with a pained pneumatic whine. I had to squeeze through the gap. Inside, the air was colder, smelling of antiseptic and something else underneath, a sweet, coppery smell that was unmistakably organic decay. The room was vast, a sterile cathedral of white tiles and stainless steel, but the tiles were cracked now, and rust wept from the steel joints. What stopped me, what truly broke the last illusion of order, was the scale. The bay was lined with 24 examination pods, clear plastic tubes like upright coffins, and every single one was occupied. A figure in a stained lab coat, its face obscured by a respirator, approached without looking up from a clipboard. The coat had a faded Vault-Tec logo on the breast. Resident 1087. You're late. The efficiency curve suffers from laggard compliance. The voice was muffled, bored. It was the tone of a clerk processing damaged inventory. He gestured with his pen toward a pod at the end of the row. Its previous occupant was being wheeled away on a gurney by an orderly, a shapeless form under a sheet. The process was a nightmare of corporate ritual. I was directed to stand in the pod, the clear door sealed with a hiss that sounded final. A mechanical arm unfolded from the ceiling, tipped with an array of needles and sensors. A calm, pre-recorded feminine voice filled the chamber. Welcome to your Vault-Tec biomass evaluation. Please remain still. This will optimize your post-war potential. A needle jabbed into my neck, not for blood, but to inject a tracer isotope. I felt it, a cold bead moving under my skin. Scanners passed over my body, their lights painting my skin in garish colors. A screen to my left lit up, listing metrics in real time. Cellular degradation, 12%. Skeletal integrity, 89%. Estimated viable biomass, 64 kilograms. Reallocation priority, standing by. The man in the lab coat tapped the glass with his pen, pointing at the standing by status. He spoke into an intercom, his voice tinny and distorted inside my pod. Subject demonstrates moderate radiation saturation, but retains high skeletal biomass. Viable for deep storage or extended surface contingency. Awaiting overseer's signature for resource reallocation protocol, he made a note on his clipboard. That was it. My life, my body, my future, summarized in 3 lines of clinical text. I was no longer a person who lived in a vault. I was Resident 1087, a container of biomass with a reallocation priority, standing in a line of identical pods that stretched into the sterile, cold distance. The alarm still bleated faintly from somewhere, and the only other sound was the hum of the scanners and the soft, rhythmic tap of the scientist's pen on his clipboard, signing work orders for the dead and the dying. The transformation was not an event, but a process of unbecoming, a meticulous reversal of assembly. The so-called adjuvant serum was a solvent, breaking down the biological glue that held a civilized consciousness together. The initial agony was a white noise scream across every nerve, a total body rebuke that made the concept of a discrete self seem laughably quaint. Pain became my primary sense, my new touchstone of reality. It lived in the architecture of me, in the calcium lattice of my bones, which now felt like burning honeycomb, and in the shrinking space between my joints, which grated like stones slowly being ground to dust. My pod in row K, designated SUBJ-1087, status stabilization, was my coffin, my womb, and my laboratory. The voice log terminal was my only tether to a linear narrative. My caretaker's orderlies in stained biosuits, whose eyes never met mine, needed the data. My subjective decay was an important column in their spreadsheets. So I spoke, my voice growing raspier each day, narrating the quiet ride of my ruin. Log entry. Day 1. Establishing a post-integration baseline. The dominant data stream is pain. It is not localized, but pervasive, a constant 40 Hz vibration resonating from the central skeletal axis. Peaks manifest as bone lightning, sudden, excruciating arcs that flash from hip to knee, from vertebrae to fingertips, leaving a phantom smell of ozone in their wake. The serum drip is a cold snake in my vein for 3 inches, then a spreading inferno. Nutrient protocol initiated. Optimized biomass sustenance. Formula Gamma. Twice daily, 300 milliliters. Visual. A viscous, taupe-colored slurry with the consistency of cold gravy. Olfactory profile. Wet plaster, overheated solder, and beneath it, the faint, sweet tongue of decaying fruit, likely destabilizing fructose compounds. Gustatory analysis. Chalk is a primary note, followed by a penetrating, bloody metal aftertaste that lingers for hours, independent of intake. Sleep is impossible in any restorative sense. The pod lighting maintains a perpetual twilight, 15 lux, and the auditory environment is a study in industrial indifference. The central fluid system cycles with a wet glug-glug hiss every 42 seconds. Pods elsewhere in the grid open and close with a sound like teeth sucking air. And from the western sector, the deep, percussive thump of the hydraulic compactors provides a grim cadence every 20 to 30 minutes. Psychological observation. I find myself fixating on the mechanics of my consent. I cannot recall the face of the overseer or the feel of my old bed. I can only see, with hyperclarity, the cheap, gray stylus in my hand and the smudge my thumb left on the line of the waiver. The words irrevocable and perpetuity echo in the silent spaces between the thunks. Log entry. Day 3. A profound physiological divergence is recorded. The standard nutrient paste now triggers an active gag reflex. The smell of it, a cloying, vitamin-rich odor mixed with the scent of wet cardboard, is physically repulsive. Conversely, my olfactory sensitivity to other organics has increased exponentially. At 14:32, orderly Jenkins passed by, consuming a rehydrated Crum Deluxe bar. From 3 meters away, through the filtered pod vents, I detected hydrolyzed animal protein, saturated fats, likely pre-war preservative, salt, monosodium glutamate, and the distinct, carcinogenic aroma of char from a microheater. My body reacted before my mind could. Saliva flooded my mouth, a painful, urgent torrent. I choked on it, a humiliating, animalistic spasm. The craving was not for sustenance, but for specificity, for the complex, degraded proteins of irradiated flesh. The deep bone ache persists, but a new superficial pain network is activated. My hands are swollen, the fingers sausage-like and stiff. The skin is undergoing rapid desiccation. It has lost all elasticity. When I scratch an itch on my left forearm, the skin doesn't redden. It flakes off in large, parchment-like sheets. The newly exposed layer is waxy, devoid of pores, and colored a uniform dull gray-green, like old cheese. There is no blood. The orderly noted this on his tablet as Phase 1 epidermal keratinization, nominal, log entry, Day 7. Visual metamorphosis is now systemic and unambiguous. The modeling has resolved into a uniform integument. My skin resembles nothing human. It is the hide of a creature cured by sun and poison, tough and inelastic, with a fine network of fissures like dry riverbeds. The color palette is of a forgotten bruise, deep charcoal grays, muddy yellows, and sickly greenish beiges. The process of depilation is eerie in its silence. My hair isn't falling out. It is turning to dust on my scalp. A fine gray powder coats the pod's headrest. My eyebrows are vanishing, leaving the bony ridge of my skull, naked and prominent. My reflection in the polished steel of a conduit across the aisle is that of a stranger, a bald, leathery mannequin with two large eyes. Neurologically, tactile sensation is decaying. I can feel pressure the hard pad against my back, but I can no longer feel the texture of the pad's fabric or the subtle chill of the plastic beneath me. It's like being wrapped in a thick, numb membrane. The hunger, however, has evolved with terrifying clarity. I no longer fantasize about pre-war meals. I fixate on the practical, the quick, efficient crunch of a giant ant's chitin, the oily, pungent warmth of a Malaret's liver eaten raw. The thought is accompanied not by revulsion, but by a cool, logistical planning. How would I catch one? Where would I strike to kill it fastest? This shift in thinking is noted with a detached, clinical interest. Log entry, Day 15. Cognitive degradation is confirmed and accelerating. This is not forgetfulness. It is deletion. At 9:15, I attempted to access the memory of my mother's voice, singing a specific lullaby. I recalled the concept of the lullaby, its title, even the color of the blanket she would tuck around me. But the sound of her voice, its timbre, its pitch, its unique warmth, the sensory data itself was gone. A 404 error in the mind. More alarmingly, episodic memories are losing their coherence. I tried to revisit my first day of work in the water purification plant. I saw a flash of pipes, felt a ghost of the damp air. Then, the memory began to stutter and fragment, the images peeling apart like old paint, dissolving into a meaningless, staticky gray fog. The emotion tied to these memories fades first, leaving hollow, brittle shells of events. Physical updates. My body is becoming a leaky vessel. Spontaneous epistaxis occurs multiple times daily. The blood is dark, tar-like, and clots poorly, leaving sticky trails down my chin and neck. My oral mucosa is breaking down. The gentle friction of the feeding tube against my gums causes immediate, painless bleeding. My joints are soundscapes of ruin. My knees, shoulders, and elbows emit a loud, gravelly crunch grind with every minor adjustment, a sound that makes the orderlies wince. I feel it more as a vibration than a pain. Log entry. Day 30. A major sensory faculty has been permanently decommissioned. Gustation taste is offline. The nutrient paste is now purely a matter of physics, a volume of warm sludge entering a biological tube. I only know I've been fed because a dull, heavy sensation manifests in my gut and slowly dissipates. I conducted a focused experiment over 4 hours, attempting to reconstruct the full sensory profile of a perfectly ripe hub flower, something I once used to sweeten tea. I could list its attributes: floral, mildly sweet, with a hint of anise. But I could not summon the taste. The memory had no experiential component. It was a dictionary definition of a ghost. In stark compensation, my hearing and smell have become weapons. I can hear the faint, failing tick-tick of a radiation dosimeter on an orderly's belt 2 rows away. I can diagnose the occupant of pod K-12 by the phlegmy, bubbling quality of his respiration's advanced pulmonary fibrosis. I can smell the difference between the orderlies. Jenkins smells of stale sweat and antiseptic. The other, Vargas, carries the faint, sweet metallic scent of concealed cancer. My vision in the perpetual gloom is preternaturally sharp. I can count the rivets on the gantry 50 feet above. The loss of taste is the final brick in a wall, separating me from a world of sensation. My face is a rigid mask. To speak this log, I must consciously force my lips apart. The desiccated skin at the corners splits with small, papery sounds. A brief sting, then nothing. The fissures remain, dark lines in the leather. The acute, screaming pain of the first week has subsided into a permanent, low-grade misery, a background radiation of discomfort. I am not ill. I am being replaced. The original tenant is being evicted, cell by cell, memory by memory. The sounds of Sector 9, the hum, the gurgle, the dreadful, rhythmic compaction are no longer external. They are the rhythm of my new biology. My body is no longer a home, but a document. Its pages are my cracking skin, its ink my dark blood, its fading text my vanishing past. The profound screaming terror of day one has been metabolized into a numb, almost academic curiosity. I am both the scientist and the experiment, logging the fascinating failure of a system called humanity. The horror is no longer in the feeling, but in the observation of its absence. The body's rebellion settled into a grim truce. The pain didn't vanish. It simply became data, a constant readout like the Geiger counter's click. The war moved inward, from nerves to narrative. The question was no longer what is happening to my body, but what remains of the person who used to inhabit it. The logs became less a medical diary and more an archaeological dig in a site that was actively collapsing. Apathy is not the absence of feeling, but the overwhelming presence of a single, monolithic feeling, a gray, static neutrality. The vibrant terror, the desperate longing, the sharp grief, these were colors that faded from my palette, leaving only shades of gray. I was becoming a creature of pure, functional present. The past was a corrupted file. The future was a pending procedure. Only the now had any weight, and its weight was the heavy, simple logic of survival. Log entry, day 60. I committed my first act of unequivocal, immoral survival. The nutrient paste delivery system for Pod K11 failed. Its occupant, an elderly woman whose name I never knew, was weakening. Her breathing was a shallow, watery whisper. When the orderly came to perform a manual tube feed for her, he was called away mid-procedure, leaving the syringe of paste, a full 300 milliliters unattached, resting on her pod service tray. My own feeding was an hour late. The hunger, that specific protein-craving beast, was a physical cramp in my gut. I watched the syringe. I calculated. Her chances of lasting the hour were low. The paste would be recorded as administered, and then wasted upon subject expiration. My need was immediate. I used the edge of my water ration cup to slowly, patiently work at the manual override latch on my pod service panel, a trick I'd observed during maintenance. It took 20 minutes. The latch gave with a soft click. I extended my arm, my leathery fingers just brushing the syringe. I dragged it off her tray, pulled it into my pod, and injected the entire cold beige mass directly into my feeding port. The relief was profound, physiological. I watched her. 10 minutes later, her whispering breath stopped entirely. I felt no guilt. I performed a cost-benefit analysis. Biomass was transferred from a failing system to a functioning one. Efficiency was maintained. I logged the event not as a sin, but as a successful resource reallocation. Log entry, day 180. A routine has crystallized. This is my life. A flicker of the overhead, lights at 0600, marks the day. Twice daily glug hiss of the paste delivery is my breakfast and dinner. The weekly decontamination spray that rains down, making my leather skin bead up with oily moisture, is my shower. The sounds are my clock. The compactor's THUMP marks the passing of groups of hours. I have names for the orderlies now, not personal names, but functional descriptors. Quick steps, heavy breather, a hummer. I have mapped the patterns of their rounds, identified the 3-minute blind spot when both are at the western compactor station. I have learned to distinguish between the sounds of pods opening for maintenance and pods opening for final reclamation. The latter has a quieter, more respectful pneumatic sigh, and is always followed by the specific rolling sound of the covered gurney. My own physical decay is stabilized. My skin is tough as cured hide. My joints ache but move without the loud grinding. The bleeding has stopped. My body has reached a new, lower equilibrium. I think of it less as my body and more as the vehicle I operate. Its needs are simple. Input fuel, expel waste, avoid mechanical failure. The memories of my life before the pod are like reading a dossier about a stranger. I acknowledge the facts, but they hold no emotional charge. I am perfectly adapted to my environment. I am a flawless, efficient component of Sector 9. Log entry, Year 1. I have forgotten my own face. Not the face in the pod's reflection. That gray, hairless, fissured mask is a familiar sight. I have forgotten the face I was born with. I found a scrap of polished metal yesterday during a rare pod-open cleaning cycle. I tried to remember what I used to look like. Brown hair? Maybe. Eyes? Blue or green? I couldn't conjure the image. The mental photograph is bleached, featureless. More disturbingly, I've forgotten the sensation of human touch that wasn't clinical or violent. What did it feel like to hold someone's hand? To hug someone? The memory is a list of facts. Hand, warm, soft, 5 fingers. The sensory and emotional data is irretrievable. I observed a group of new, unaltered residents being led through the sector for processing. They were soft. Their skin glowed with a fragile pink vitality. They flinched at the sounds, their eyes wide with a wet, luminous fear. I looked at them not with pity or kinship, but with a distant, analytical contempt. So fragile, so noisy with their sniffling and whispers, so inefficient. They were like unprotected circuitry in a radioactive storm. Their suffering seemed like a weakness, a failure to adapt. The gap between me and them felt wider than the gap between me and the radroach I still dream of eating. Log entry, Year 5. An encounter today solidified my taxonomy. A power fluctuation caused a sector-wide containment breach protocol. My pod, along with a dozen others in a stable status, was manually opened, and we were herded slowly, due to our stiff gates, into a reinforced holding pen. A team of vault security in full hazard armor stood guard. One of them, a young man, couldn't stop staring. His gaze traveled over my hairless scalp, my leathery, gray skin, my eyes that no longer need to blink as often. His face, visible behind his visor, was a cocktail of horror and disgust. He muttered to his partner, "Jesus, look at them." Like walking corpses. He didn't say it to be cruel. He said it as a simple biological fact. And he was right. In that moment, I saw myself through his eyes. Not a former resident, not a victim, but a monster. A thing that belonged behind plastic or in a compactor. The revelation was not painful. It was clarifying. It was the final update to my internal file. Species designation. Updated. From human to ghoul. The label fit. It was efficient. It explained the contempt of the soft ones and my own lack of connection to them. The guards weren't protecting us. They were containing a biohazard. Log entry, Year 20. Apathy is complete. It is a finished state, a silent room. The last vestiges of emotional weather have passed. The THUMP of the compactor is a neutral zone. The failure of Pod L7's occupant, yesterday a violent, shuddering seizure that ended in silence, was an event of no more significance than a light bulb burning out. I noted it. I adjusted my model of Pod L7's status from occupied to vacant. My own needs have distilled to an atomic level. I am aware of a new, quiet preference. I find the ambient, constant radiation of the sector comfortable. It's a faint, warm tingling on my skin, a background hum that speaks of potent energy. The clean areas of the vault, where the soft ones live, feel dead and sterile by comparison. My thoughts are slow, heavy, and practical. I spend hours contemplating single concepts. The path of a coolant drip down a pipe, the pattern of cracks in the ceiling grime. I am waiting, not for rescue or an end, but for the next procedural step. I am a stabilized prototype sitting on a shelf. The concept of hope is a linguistic artifact, a word with no corresponding feeling. I am not unhappy. I am not anything. I am operational. The metamorphosis is complete. The mind has been reformatted to fit the body's new reality. The victim of Vault 42 is gone. What remains is a ghoul, a perfectly adapted organism for a world of rust, radiation, and ruin. The tragedy is over. All that's left is the chemistry. The transition is documented not by a dramatic event, but by the chilling simplicity of the final log entry. The mind doesn't break. It settles like sediment in toxic water. The new logic is impeccable. Pain is information. Compassion is inefficiency. The past is irrelevant data. The self is a temporary administrative label. I have accepted the fundamental truth of the Wasteland before I ever set foot in it. Nothing is sacred, everything is fuel, and survival is the only dogma. The baptism of fire was not an explosion, but this slow, cold realization that I have become what the soft ones fear, and their fear is the most rational thing about them. Revelation arrived not with a cry, but with a system's collapse. A deep-throated metallic groan, the sound of a great tendon snapping somewhere in the vault's substructure, shuddered through the deck plates. The omnipresent soul-numbing hum that had been the audio bedrock of Sector 9 for decades choked, sputtered into a death rattle, and fell silent. In the vacuum left behind, the emergency bioluminescent strips along the floor gutter flickered to life, casting a corpse-green pallor that transformed the endless grid of pods into a sunken, silent necropolis. A series of soft, pneumatic sighs followed as the seals on hundreds of containment units, their power severed, disengaged in a wave. My own door drifted open an inch. No klaxon blared. No calm. Recorded voice instructed us to remain calm. The machine hadn't been switched off. Its fundamental processes had ceased. We were left floating in the inertia of its absence. For a long time, I did nothing. I listened to the new acoustics of decay, the deep, resonant ping, P-I-N-G, ping of superstructure contracting as it cooled, the irregular drip of condensate from a severed pipe, the wet, ragged chorus of breathing from nearby pods. Time, a meaningless metric here, stretched. Eventually, the pure mechanics of curiosity overrode ingrained passivity. I placed my leathery palm against the pod door and pushed. It swung open without resistance. The air that washed over me was tomb cold and carried the sharp, acidic stink of burnt electrical insulation, underlaid by the flat, metallic scent of stagnant water. I stepped onto the graded floor. My designation changed in that instant. I was no longer SUB J1087, a stable data point in an active experiment. I was an unscheduled contingency, a piece of rogue liveware wandering the corpse of the machine. The instinct to flee upward, toward the memory of atriums and soft light, was an extinct impulse. That geography belonged to a different species, the soft ones. My ecology, the only one my reconstituted biology understood, was here in the deep administrative viscera. A cold, analytical pull, clearer than any fear, drew my stiff limbs toward the origin point of the old, defining rhythm the western sector, the source of the thump. My movement was a slow, shuffling conservation of energy. I passed pods where occupants stared out with the glassy vacancy of abandoned dolls, or lay in the final, unnoticed surrender of terminated systems. I passed banks of dead terminals, their dark screens offering smudged reflections of a hairless, gray-skinned stranger I intellectually recognized as myself. The journey was a sensory audit of a failed industrial process. The massive bulkhead ceiling Zone 9 Alpha was a vault within a vault. Faded yellow paint, stenciled warnings, reclamation and processing, Authorized yield technicians only. Contamination protocol. Delta is active. Its array of hydraulic pistons was inert. Bracing my shoulder against the cold steel, I pushed until the metal groaned and yielded a narrow gap. I slipped through. The chamber beyond was a cathedral to a single, horrifying logic. It was not a place of passionate slaughter, but of immaculate, efficient conversion. White tiles for easy washdown covered the walls. The floor was graded, sloped toward central drains. The engineering was chilling in its elegant simplicity. I could trace the network. All waste lines and final reclamation conduits from the pods fed into a central processing spine. The system was a clean trilogy. First, a large industrial centrifuge, its drums stained with ancient, dark residues, designed for the separation of soft tissue from skeletal structure. Second, a colossal hydraulic compactor, its piston head the size of a man, the undeniable author of the thump for reducing bone and inorganic remnants to dense, manageable cubes. Third, and most eloquent, a large, jacketed, stirred rendering vat. Into this vessel went the separated soft tissue. A laminated process flowchart, hanging from a chain, explained with bland corporate clip art. Rendering gives sterilization, gives homogenization, gives nutrient transfer. A warm, insulated pipeline, labeled Return to Synthesis Tank Farm, led directly from the vat out of the chamber. The circularity was so complete, so mathematically perfect, it felt like a physical impact to the chest. We were not test subjects. We were the feedstock, the factory, and the consumer. Vault-Tec had engineered a perfect closed biological engine. The optimized biomass sustenance was not synthesized from base chemicals. It was us, rendered, purified, and pumped back through the tubes. A profound cold nausea, unrelated to any functioning stomach, settled in my core. This was the incontrovertible how. The why required intellectual excavation. I found it in a small, reinforced office overlooking the processing floor, a glass-paned booth for a shift supervisor. The terminal was dark. The metal desk was a monument to pre-war bureaucracy. The central drawer was locked. 5 minutes of brutal leverage with a length of broken conduit snapped the mechanism. Inside, filed with fastidious neatness, was a folder. Project Perpetual Yield Phases 3 and 4. Implementation and Liaison. Document 1. The Technical Document Memo. Vault-Tec Internal. Project Perpetual Yield. Vault 42 Specifications. VTPY 42 to 778. 2. Oversight Committee. Biosustainability Division. From Dr. A. Silver, Project Lead. Subject: Phase 3 Implementation Approval. Post-war biomass recycling and workforce stabilization protocols. Overview. Contrary to public-facing literature, Vault 42's mandate is the long-term study of human resource optimization under absolute scarcity. The cellular resilience serum, FEV adjuvant strain 42A, is a biological stabilizer. Key functions: 1. Induced cellular stasis. Halts active necrosis at secure gallification, ensuring structural integrity for long-term labor. 2. Neural pathway dampening. Targeted suppression of limbic activity to eliminate emotional volatility and ensure compliance with high-stress or morally redundant tasks. 3. Metabolic recalibration. Alters cravings to favor irradiated biomatter, preparing subjects for sustainable surface foraging. Goal: create a self-sustaining, obedient workforce. Failed units are recycled to sustain remaining ones, closing the resource loop. I was a successfully manufactured product. My anguish was a validated metric. Document 2. The Financial Political Document. Confidential Briefing. For Enclave Liaison only. Classification: Black Seed. Subject: Vault 42. Reclamation Cores. Precursor Assessment. Assessment: Successful. Strain 42A produces a stable, placid unit ideal for high-casualty operations. radioactive excavation, FEV cleanup, pacification of surface dwellers. Financial note: integrated organic recycling cuts enclave logistical burden by approximately 75%. Units fuel themselves on detritus and fallen comrades. A cost-saving soldier. Recommendation: authorize controlled release of Ghoul units for field testing. Align with Enclave Surface Reclamation Timeline 2078-2080. We were a line item in a weapons contract. A disposable biological tool for the pure Enclave to scour the world. The understanding was a vast, neutral alignment. Every datum snapped into place. The scale, the indifference, it was logical. We were an advanced product line. A dry shuffle sounded behind me. I turned. A ghoul stood there, far more decayed. Its skin was petrified bark, nose collapsed, one ear a fused knot. It wore tattered Vault-Tec lab coat remnants. Its cataract-filmed eyes held a piercing lucidity. The central filing cabinet, it rasped, voice like brittle pages. It took me years, when the auxiliary power still cycled on for minutes a day, just enough to read a paragraph. And remember, I was silent. A wheezing laugh. The irony, the contract was never fulfilled. The signal to release us never came. They left the machine running with no client to collect the yield. It shuffled to the grimy window. I was Dr. Alden Armitage, project psychologist. I designed the neural dampening protocols. I volunteered. A skeletal finger tapped its temple. The serum is indiscriminate, staff or subject. It just optimizes. I have been a ghost in my own machine for decades. It turned its milky gaze sharp. The core secret? Aesthetics. The Enclave worshipped purity. Clean lines, clean blood. We were the necessary ugliness. The sin outsourced. Biological trash compactors, meant to chew up the ruined world so they could step onto a clean one. We were never people. We were a function. Dr. Armitage was the final evidence, the architect consumed by his blueprint. His words were a technical debrief. The conspiracy was a business model, a procurement strategy, a philosophy of disgust, written in steel, serum, and our flesh. The truth was the operating manual. I had finally learned to read. The silence after Dr. Armitage's rust voice stopped was profound. It wasn't an empty silence, but a dense, packed one, filled with the weight of the documents in my hand and the stark geometry of the processing floor below. The evidence was no longer an external fact to be uncovered. It was a solvent, working its way into the cracks of what remained of my mind, dissolving the last sedimentary layers of a forgotten self. The veteran ghoul watched me, its lucid, milky eyes seeing not my face, but the processing of the data. It gave one final, dry nod, as if confirming a download was complete, then turned and shuffled away into the deeper gloom of the sector, a walking relic returning to its archive. I was alone with the conclusion, and the conclusion was this. The monster was not the radiation, nor the serum, nor the ghoul I had become. The monster was the pristine, uncompromising logic that had built the machine. The monster wore a tie and signed a waiver. The monster was the idea that everything, flesh, fear, love, memory could be optimized, and what couldn't be optimized could be profitably recycled. I didn't feel anger. Anger requires a sense of injustice, and injustice implies a broken system. The system had worked perfectly. It had achieved every one of its stated goals with an elegance that was almost beautiful. I felt, instead, a vast and chilling clarity. The final document was not on paper. It was the vault itself. I left the office and walked back into the main pod chamber, but I saw it with new sensors. This was not a place of tragedy. It was a facility. Those were not suffering souls in the pods. They were units in various stages of production, stabilization, or breakdown. The soft, mewling cries from a nearby pod weren't expressions of pain. but system alerts audible signals of mechanical failure in the biological hardware. The compassion that should have resonated in me at those sounds was simply not there. It had been dampened as per the technical document's specifications, and in its place was a cool operational understanding. The emotional void wasn't a personal failing. It was a design success. I needed to see the final piece, the personal document, the human fingerprint on the blueprint. I retraced my steps past the rows of pods, past my own open cylinder, and toward the sector's central command nexus, a place marked Oversight. The door here was thicker, reinforced, but the lock had been melted long ago by some forgotten surge or act of desperation. Inside, the air was drier, preserved. A single, large terminal dominated a desk. In a slim drawer, beneath a stack of pristine, unused forms, I found a personal journal bound in cheap synthetic leather. The label read, Overseer T. Gable, Project Notes. This was the third document, the one that bridged the cold corporate why with the wet, warm how. Document 3, the personal document entry 1, October 23, 2077. The Great War is over. We felt the tremors. The sealed orders are activated. Vault 42's true purpose is now in effect. The board was right. Survival is not about preserving the past, but engineering the future. The Perpetual Yield Protocol commences at 0600 tomorrow. I will address the residents. The lie will be difficult, but necessary for the future. Entry 17, November 15th, 2077. First serum injections administered to Group Alpha. Compliance was high. The story of a radiation booster is being accepted. Initial side effects are severe. Agony. Doctor. Silver assures me the neural dampening will activate within the week. The screams in the medical wing are impacting staff morale. I have authorized double rations of calming agents for the medical team. We must remember the greater good. Entry 56, January 30th, 2078. Phase 2 begins. The first non-viable subjects were transferred to reclamation this morning. The process is clinically efficient. The nutrient paste output from the first batch tested within optimal parameters. Doctor. Silver presented me with a chart showing the projected point of total resource independence, 8.7 years. We will have created a truly sustainable society. The Ethics Committee's pre-war objections seem small-minded now. Entry 102, October 10th, 2078. I toured the stabilization pods today. The change is remarkable. The subjects are quiet, compliant. Their eyes are empty. It's working better than projected. I found myself speaking to one, subject 781, as if it were still a person. It stared through me. For a moment, I felt a profound loneliness. This is the cost of a future, I suppose. We cannot carry our old souls with us. Entry 155, September 22nd, 2079. Communications with the Enclave liaison have ceased. The last message was fragmented. Stand by geopolitical recalibration. Maintain project integrity. We are alone. The purpose of the product is gone, but the production line remains. Do we stop? Dr. Silver says no. The science must continue. The data is priceless. I find myself agreeing. This is our world now. Final entry, undated, ink blurred. They put me in the pod today. Silver's idea. To fully understand the long-term effects, Overseer. First-hand data is irreplaceable. He was smiling. I couldn't refuse. It was logical. The serum is cold. I can feel it. Simplifying things. The guilt about my wife. About the lies. It's becoming just data. Fading. Maybe this is peace. Maybe this is what we made. God forgive us? No. God forgive me. I just wanted to build a future that... The entry ended in a long, wavering ink smear. as if the pen had fallen from a slackening hand. Overseer Gable, the man who signed the orders, who gave the speeches, who wrestled with the ethics until the serum washed the struggle away. He wasn't a mustache-twirling villain. He was a bureaucrat who believed in the greater good, a man who got on the production line he designed and became willingly a product. His final fading regret was the most human thing in the entire vault, and it had been efficiently deleted. I closed the journal. The fatalistic understanding was now total. Nothing had gone wrong. Everything had gone exactly right. The vault performed its function. The Enclave's betrayal or abandonment wasn't a twist of fate. It was a predictable outcome in a universe of pure, selfish utility. Why maintain a contract with tools when you could simply take the world later? The why didn't matter anymore, because the why was always a temporary fiction profit, patriotism, purity overlaying the same endless hunger, the hunger to control, to optimize, to consume. The revelation was not about who caused the apocalypse. It was the understanding that the apocalypse wasn't an event. It was a mindset. The bombs were merely a violent symptom. The true fallout was this quiet, efficient, endless conversion of life into resource, of person into product, of conscience into a dampened nerve signal. The world outside wasn't ruined by war. It was perfected by it. The surface, with its raiders, its mutated beasts, its struggle for pure survival, was just Vault 42 writ large, without the clean tiles and laminated instructions. It was the same system, stripped of its pre-war paint. I looked at my hands, the gray, tough hide stretched over efficient bone. I was not a victim of this system. I was its purest creation, a being stripped of the inconvenient illusions of morality and memory, designed for persistence in a universe that had always viewed life as a temporary, rearrangeable fuel source. The horror wasn't that I had become this. The horror was that, in the end, this was all there ever was to become. The vault hadn't changed me. It had revealed me. It had scraped away the soft, sentimental fiction of a human soul and shown the durable, pragmatic substrate beneath a substrate that could survive when the fairy tale is burned. The truth set me free, not into hope, but into a vast, unshakable certainty. I was not cursed. I was awake. And the wasteland awaiting me wasn't a punishment. It was home. The climb out of sub-level Sigma was not an ascent toward light, but a transit through layers of a dead god. I moved through the silent, dark arteries of the vault, through atriums where dust lay thick over plastic plants and cheerful propaganda murals urging teamwork, through living quarters where families had once lived, now just geometric arrangements of decayed fabric and child-sized skeletons in bunks. The air grew warmer, drier, tasting less of antiseptic and more of ancient mildew and stone. I encountered no one. Vault 42 was a tomb with perfect filing. I found the main entrance door, a colossal, geared wheel of steel locked from the inside by a manual mechanism crusted with rust. It took hours of slow, relentless pressure, my body creaking with the strain, to turn it. The gears screamed in protest, a shocking noise in the silence, and then gave way with a final shearing crack. The door slid open 6 inches and stopped, jammed by centuries of geologic settling. A sliver of blinding, furious white light cut through the vault's gloom, so intense it felt physical. A hot, dry wind, carrying the scent of ozone, dust, and something profoundly alien, the smell of unlimited space rushed in, swirling the dust at my feet. I squeezed through the gap, my leathery skin scraping against cold, rough concrete. The sensory overload was absolute, a violent erasure of the vault's sterile reality. Sound first. A keening, constant wind across stone and metal, the distant groan of a collapsing building, the skitter of gravel. Then sight. My new eyes, adapted for twilight, recoiled at the furious glare of a sun hanging in a washed-out yellowish sky. Shapes resolved slowly. I stood on a mountainside, the vault door set into sheer rock. Below, stretching to a shimmering, distorted horizon, was the Wasteland. It was not a field of fire. It was a geometry of ruin. As skeletons of pre-war buildings stood like broken teeth. Twisted highways formed concrete ribbons snapped and coiled by ancient violence. Everything was the color of rust, ash, and bleached bone. The scale was not terrifying. It was correct. This was the world the vault's logic had been built to survive. It was the machine's intended workshop. I took a step forward. The gravel crunched under my boot, a sound of shocking finality. I was outside. The Geiger counter on a discarded Pip-Boy I'd scavenged began a steady, frantic chatter like a frenzied insect. The radiation washed over me, and I felt it not as poison, but as a vibrant, tingling energy, a familiar hum on my skin. It was comfortable. It was home. This was the irreversible act. Not a decision, but a realization of state. By stepping into that light, by feeling that radioactive wind and not dying, I ratified the contract my body had already signed. I was not a human in a hostile environment. I was a component of the environment itself. The last ghost of the person who had walked into Vault-Tec's office a lifetime ago. The one who feared the sky finally dissolved in that harsh light. There was no ceremony, no internal battle, just a silent click of completion. I found a vantage point on a jutting slab of rock. The wind pulled at my ragged clothes. I looked out at the corpse of the world, and I spoke my sentence, not to anyone, but to the logic of the universe that had made me. I did not survive the fallout, I said, my voice a dry rasp against the wind. I am its conclusion. Vault-Tec did not ruin me. They refined me. They burned away the weak material, the sentiment, the nostalgia, the fragile morality, and left the durable core. I am not a mutant. I am not a ghoul. Those are the Vault's words for a product they designed. I am what remains when the pretense is stripped by fire and logic. I am the viable yield. The synthesis was complete. The victim, the subject, the experiment hall were administrative fictions. I was a being perfectly adapted to the fundamental truth the war had revealed. Existence is a process of consumption and persistence. Nothing more. The Vault, the Enclave, the Old World, they were all just earlier, more complicated versions of the same process, clogged with inefficient dreams. I was the streamlined model. I began to walk down the mountainside, toward the shattered skyline. The wind was constant. In the distance, I saw movement figures picking through rubble, the glint of predatory eyes from a crevice. Life in its new, efficient forms. The cyclical prophecy of the Wasteland unfolded not as a story of rise and fall, but as a simple law of physics. The desert does not change. It is a constant. The wind scours, the radiation decays, the strong consume the weak. Civilization's Vault-Tec, the Enclave, whatever tribes now fought in the ashes, were just temporary shapes in the sand, complex patterns the wind allowed for a time before erasing. They believe they matter. They build, they dream, they write memos on perpetual yield, and then the wind resumes. I would walk into that desert. I would eat what I could find. I would drink from irradiated pools. I would persist. Not for a purpose, not for revenge, not to rebuild, but because I was engineered to. The final grim joke of the universe is that the only thing it truly values is persistence. Morality, love, memory, these are inefficient fuels. They burn fast and bright and leave nothing but ash. But a creature of leather and bone, with a dampened mind and a hunger for rotten meat. That is a slow, enduring burn. That is the engine that outlasts the architect. A distorted signal caught my ear. From a hollow in the rocks, a shattered radio, powered by a fading fission battery, sputtered a pre-war song. The melody was warped. The singer's voice stretched into a ghostly wail. A song about love and sunshine. The sound wasn't sad. It was absurd. A fossilized dream buzzing in the throat of the new world. I left it behind. The Geiger counter's chatter began to slow, its battery dying, its purpose served. The clicks faded into the wind. Soon, there was only the sound of my own footsteps on the gravel and the endless, patient sigh of the wasteland. I didn't look back at the vault door. It was just another hole in the rock. The sentence had been passed, not on me, but by me. The verdict was life, a specific, precise, and utterly silent kind of life. The cycle was not a tragedy. It was just a cycle, and I was now a permanent part of its turning.